When James the Apostle writes in James 4:4, "You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity against God? Therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God." That the Apostle John is taking that truth and putting it on a stage with players in a theater production where we see these in vivid imagery and symbolism, the power and implications of what it really means to be friends with the world versus a friend of God. We're seeing this come to bear, and we see that the running theme that we've been seeing throughout Revelation is that in light of all of the world systems that push us away from God, that Jesus is calling his people to be faithful witnesses in the midst of it, right? Let me review. It's been a while since we've been in Revelation, so let me review. We are now in Act 4 of Revelation. Act 1, remember, Jesus addressing his church, the 7 churches, and calling his church to be faithful followers. Act 2, the throne room. And that's where the Lamb is found worthy to open the scroll and then unleash all the redemptive work of God and the judgments of God on the earth. Okay? Act 3, starting in Revelation 11 and moving forward, we have the battle between the dragon and the woman and the child, representing the battle that is cosmic between Satan and all of his evil forces and the woman who is the people of God and the child who is the promised Messiah. There's a battle. We are engaged in the midst of this battle. And now we come to Act 4. In Act 4, we have the 7 angels carrying the 7 bowls, and they are bringing the final judgment. It's almost the closing act. We're getting there. Acts 4 is the final judgment. Now, what you see on the back of your sheet, if you're here, you'll see that we're going to look at what is featured for judgments. We have the woman, we have the beasts, we have the kings. Who do they represent? Because remember, we're in a style of literature, a genre, that looks at what we're reading as imagery, as symbols that convey a truth. All of these represent a truth. The woman, the beast, and the king. So we're going to look at who each of these represent, okay? The woman, the beast, and the kings. Who are all of these, and what do they represent? So first of all, the woman. Who does the woman represent? She seems to be very prominent and featured in this passage. One of the 7 angels, it says in verse 1 of chapter 17, who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters." The great prostitute. So she is conveyed as a prostitute, someone who, if you would, whores herself out, who sells her body, who gives herself away, and she does so as an act of betrayal against God. It is an act of unfaithfulness towards God, against God. Who does she represent? She represents the systems of the world, the philosophy of the world, the agenda of the world, which is all rooted in one thing. Let's live a life and build a life that flourishes without God. Let us build a life and build a society that flourishes without God. So it is an utter rejection of the presence of God here on earth that seeks to build a life without him. Now, this goes all the way back to Babel. And we'll see later on that she is called in verse 5, it says her name. The name written on her forehead was a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. Babylon is the ancient city that was the longtime nemesis of the people of Israel. You remember? And Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar eventually would come in and devastate Israel, destroy the temple, destroy all of the institutions that made Israel Israel, and then took Israel out of the land and brought Israel into exile. This was Babylon, longtime enemy of God. But in the time of John, Babylon is not a major city at all. So Babylon is now a representative name, a name for all of the authorities and all of the institutions that would seek to go against God and bring a society that would remove God altogether out of it. Okay? That's what the woman represents. Babylon, who represents this historical, someone who is trans-historical, someone who crosses all of history with this one agenda. Let's live a life, build a society without God in it. Do we see this today? Yeah, she's alive and well in our society today. If we look at the agendas of our society, it is largely to build a secular society that says, let's build a society without God in it. So let's reject his authority. Let's reject any absolute claims that God may have on us and how we live, in our morality, in how we make laws, how we live together. Let's do it all without God or his authority. Alive and well, correct? That's San Francisco. That's the West Coast. That's the East Coast. That's everything, if you think about it. This is how it's laying out. Now, that leads to the kings of the earth. And the kings of the earth really represent all the powers of that be, the powers and governments of the nations, all the nations. So verse 2, with her, the woman, the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adultery. So here the nations get in bed with the woman, who's the prostitute, allured by her promises that we can build a life that has financial security, that has wealth, that has prosperity, and we can do it all without God. And the buy-in of the nations with this philosophy and this system makes them drunk, makes them intoxicated. I'm not going to ask how many of you have ever been drunk in your life, but by anecdotal evidence, I'm going to infer that when you're drunk, you lose your sense of right and wrong. You lose your inhibitions. You lose any sense of what is even risky or dangerous to you. I remember college. I remember people getting drunk and thinking it was a great idea to jump from the second story into the swimming pool. I mean, I remember a lot of crazy stuff, and I had to pick people up afterwards and all of that. Okay, so, but you lose your sense of risk and what is dangerous and not. And this is what is happening to our world. We're buying into this notion that we can seek prosperity and pursue happiness apart from God. And the more that we see it happen, whether it's in consumerism, materialism, or just entertainment, we are seeing people who become numb to the risks. Addiction is a great example of that. You become numb to the risks. You become you need more, and you care less and less and less about what happens to you or the people around you, right? This is the intoxication of the nations. Let's build a life that pursues happiness without God. We can do it. We've got the technology. So Silicon Valley becomes an instrument of finding this kind of pleasure and happiness. We have financial centers in major cities who are all intending to build happiness without God. Just let's love money. It's the love of money that is the root of all evil, right? So this is what we're cultivating in our world. You go and look at how cities are laid out. You have Well, what used to be major hubs were the shopping centers. The shopping centers are where you would do your commercialism and consumerism, and you would give tax breaks to these big shopping centers and corporations. Why? Because they are the means by which we find happiness without God. Without God. So it's all over. It's all over in how we do society. It's how the system works. We're in it, right? This is the world that we're living in. So what we see now is something new. The woman is now riding the beast. Who's the beast? We've seen the beast before. And the beast, again, the beast symbolizes something. Sometimes I have to remember and remind us all that there is not a literal beast, right, that's going to somehow roam around the world and wreak havoc. It is the beast that represents the spirit of Antichrist, the spirit of no Messiah. And we've seen how the beast and the dragon form this unholy trinity. Remember that? The dragon and the two beasts, they form this unholy trinity that mimic the Father and the Son and the Spirit. That's what they do. That's what they do in this world system. The world system that seeks to do away with God says, no, we don't need God, but what we do need is an evil force that will set up a whole new city and society. And that's what's behind Babylon. That's what's behind this build a life, build a city movement. It is satanic, the unholy trinity that is behind it. Now, what's we're going to see in just a couple chapters is, while the unholy trinity is building this great city of Babylon that is without God, God, the Holy Trinity, is also preparing a holy city, the New Jerusalem, who's going to come. And so here is the challenge. The challenge is, which city are you going to belong to? To which city will you belong? Will you belong to the great city that's trying to build a society without God in it? Or do you belong to the holy city in which the Lamb reigns and brings restoration and renewal? If you belong to the holy city and the Lamb, it will require a level of faithfulness. A level of faithfulness in the midst of what's coming up against us. We're going to come up against the woman and the beasts and the kings. Or, in other words, we're going to come up against a system, whether it's in our workplace that seeks to try to do life without God, and you may be identified with Jesus in your workplace and then considered someone who's not part of the program, right? And so are you willing to take the cost of that? Are you willing to feel the rub of that and play off the tension that there is to compromise and give in and become more like the world that seeks to find happiness and comfort and consumerism and materialism? That's the big question. Will we stay faithful? If we stay faithful, are we willing to count the cost? The cost in our workplace, the cost in our families, the cost of being in our city, being in our neighborhoods. Are we willing to count that cost? That's the big challenge. That's the big question. So, as we see the woman and the beasts and the kings, they start to form this alliance together, and one of the things that they try to do is they come against the church. They come against the people of God. Verse 6. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. This is the woman saying, we're trying to build a life without God, but it's these people of God, these people of the Lamb, the followers of Jesus, who keep bringing the presence of God into what we're trying to build. And so we're going to try to get rid of them. That's the agenda. That's what's driving it. Let's get rid of the presence of God. And who carries it? We do, right? So there's pressure, there's persecution that comes against the faithful, those who follow Jesus. And then if we look at our world today, we understand that that is happening. There are more Christian martyrs today than at any other time in history. More people who are being persecuted because of their faithful witness to Jesus. That's happening in our world today, more than ever before in history. So, the woman is alive and well, right? The prostitute is alive and well. The system that intoxicates nations into thinking this is how we can build a life, that's alive and well. It's all over our world today. Then, in verse 12, it says, the 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beasts. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beasts. That is a powerful alliance. The 10 kings representing the major powers of our world. They line up getting drunk on the philosophy that we can build a life without God. And they line up with the beast. That's a powerful alliance. It's intimidating. So just when you think, man, this is bleak, how are we as the people of God ever going to make it through? That's what leads to the change, right? So the challenge is the question, to which city will you belong? And when it gets real bleak, that's when you're really going to be tested in how faithful you will be as part of the holy city. But here's the hope. There will be a change. The tide will turn. And that's what we see here in verse 15. They're going to lose to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. The angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, languages. The beasts and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They're going to turn on her. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire, for God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled. And that woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. All the kings of the earth are going to look at this worldly system and say, this isn't working for us. This isn't all the promises you made that we can build a life, build a morality, build a sense of justice, and see a flourishing city without God. It's falling apart on us. It's not working. And they're going to turn on her. And where's that going to come from? God's going to put that in their hearts to turn on her. The tide's going to turn. The change is going to happen. Now, sometimes we can think that's going to happen down the road. I think it's starting to happen now. Secularism is having its sway today, right? It's really taking over all of our institutions, Hollywood, government, media. It's all over the place. Now that it's got the sway, now it's up to them to figure out if they can maintain. Can they actually build a utopia, an ideal society that's based on this notion that we can do it without God? And frankly, there's a lot of gaps and a lot of holes. And a lot of people are seeing that, and they're seeing it in the sense that they're realizing that all of this pursuit of happiness and wealth and prosperity is really actually dehumanizing us. And it's giving us no purpose. It's not giving us answers to what's the meaning of our lives. It is falling way, way short in providing those kinds of answers to the larger questions of life. And so as people pursue the promise of a life without God that can be flourishing and happy, they're understanding, wait, you can't deliver on this. You can't deliver on this promise. And so they turn. And we're starting to see that with people who are saying, maybe we were wrong. Maybe we do actually need God or some sense of transcendence or some level of spirituality. We need something that's going to help us address the larger issues. So the tide will turn, but I believe it's turning even now. It's starting to turn on itself. So they turn on her, and then finally justice is served, and she falls. The woman falls. If you look at chapter 18, I'm going to do a quick overview of 18. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, had great authority. The earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice, he shouted, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great." And she's become a ghost town. If you read on, this mighty Babylon is now haunted by demons, by beasts. She's emptied of everything that she once was. And then it says in verse 5, the sins of Babylon are piling up, piling up, piling up, piling up, and they are remembered by God, and God is going to bring justice. She's going to have so much punishment and so much judgment that it's going to be double the double is the phrase. Verse 6, give back to her as she's given. Pay her back double for what she's done. Pour her a double portion from her own cup. Meaning that the judgment that's coming is going to be thorough. And it's going to be equitable. They're saying the harm that Babylon and the system brought to my people is going to be repaid double. Double. It's going to be thorough. And God is going to show that he ultimately is Lord. He is Lord and judge. And we'll see in verse 8, her glory is going to end suddenly. There's going to be death. There's going to be grief. There's going to be starvation. There's going to be fire. We're going to see that her fall is going to happen so quickly. And it says in an hour and a day. In an hour and a day. It's repeated. Verse 8, verse 10, verse 17. In an hour and a day, she's gone. She's done. Because God's judgment is swift. And when she falls, the people who wail and weep the most are the people who were in bed with her economically. So it goes on to talk about the merchants and those who were trading and those who did a lot of global commerce with Babylon, with the system, with the idea that we can build a life without God. They're the ones who are going to weep the most. And then in verse 12 and 13, John catalogs 29 different items that they would trade across nations as a way of trying to build a society. And here's the indictment. If you look at the very end of verse 13 of chapter 18, there's this list. And in fact, if you look at that list that starts with verse 12, cargoes of gold. There's an and in the Greek. There's an and in between each one of these, and that's a device. It's a literary device. If you put an and in between each of them, you realize cargoes of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk. When you put that and, the point is all of this is gone. All of this, all these items are gone. The whole economic system is crushed. And then when you go to the very end, here's the indictment. An indictment on a society and a system that wanted to elevate human flourishing. Where does it end up? At the very end, it says, and human beings sold as slaves. The whole promise of the system of doing life without God was meant to elevate humanity. What does it do? It dehumanizes. We have more people who are being trafficked as slaves today than at any other time in history. That's a promise that's fallen short, right? The promise of a system of trying to do life without God has fallen woefully short. That's where this secular agenda for trying to build an ideal society in a utopia is going to fall short. And in the end, those who stay faithful, through all of this, are going to sing a song. And that song is in verse 20, where it says, "Rejoice over her, you heavens. Rejoice, you people of God. Rejoice, apostles and prophets, for God has judged her with the judgment she imposed on you." Which means that it is not our job to try to get payback. If there's persecution, if there's pushback in our workplace, it is not our job to try to get our rights and try to get our place and try to make people pay. Not when you read Revelation. You realize there is a payment that will be paid by the living God. That's whoever it is that's pushing against you, that's who they're going to stand before, right? Keep that in mind, right? You want to give payback? It's going to be nothing compared to the payback that's coming to those who are going to face him. And that then builds your empathy for the person who's persecuting you. And that builds your empathy in the sense that you want to now start to pray for that person. You want to bless that person. And you get into understanding why Jesus said that in the Sermon on the Mount. Bless those who persecute you. Pray for those who come against you. Why? Because they're going to face somebody who's going to be the ultimate judge. You don't want that. No, but you don't want that for them, right? So, after all of this is the final judgment. What are you feeling? When I've been meditating on this passage this week of both 17 and 18, it's awful. Like this feeling in my stomach, it just, this is a terrible, awesome judgment. It is swift, it is quick, it is complete, it is thorough, and in the end, the Lord shows who is Lord. He is Lord. He is the King of all kings, and he will have his way. So when things get bleak and we start to see that the world is getting darker and darker and darker, and we wonder, God, where are you? We need to remember that all it takes for God to make things right is one swift word. It's going to be quick. In an hour, it says it'll be done. So what do we do with this? Two things. Two charges here. The first charge is be separate from the world. Be separate from the world. And that we see in verse 4 of 18. Chapter 18, verse 4 says, "Then I heard another voice from heaven say, 'Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues.'" How do you know that you're like getting sucked in? You're getting part of the world, part of her agenda. Here's her mantra that she says in chapter 18. Here's what she says. In her heart, it says, she boasts. And what does she boast? "I sit enthroned as queen. I am not a widow. I will never mourn." You know what she's saying is, no one can touch me. I am self-sufficient. I am all that I need. I am unaffected and untouched by anybody and anything. Okay? Now, in our culture today, that sounds more like, I am my own person. I am the captain of my soul. I am the master of my fate. No one knows me but me. I am the expert on me. I will determine what is right and wrong because I am my own authority, right? So those are the things we hear. If it's so easy because we're in this world to start adopting that language, start thinking that that's true, that maybe I am the captain of my soul. Maybe I can determine what love is and what relationships are and what marriage is and all of those things, what gender is, what sexuality. Maybe it is up to me. And when we start thinking that way, we start going down the road of the woman and the system. And the voice is saying to us, the voice of God, come out of her, my people. You don't belong to her. You're my people. You belong to me, and I belong to you. So stay with me. Really important. Sometimes we need to separate ourselves for good amount of time, like a little retreat, a little sabbatical, or something that gets us out of the system long enough so that we can see what really is. Pull out so that we can see objectively what are some of the mantras that I've taken in for myself? What is some of the language that I'm co-opting from just the people around me? And how is it affecting my thinking? How is it affecting how I see myself, how I see other people? Sometimes we need to pull ourselves out of that for periods of time to really examine what it is we've adopted into our lives. That's why, if you noticed, when John, at the very beginning, gets this vision, it says that the Spirit pulled him out and led him into the wilderness. If you notice that in 17, the Spirit led him into the wilderness. Why the wilderness? Because in the wilderness, you are separate. You're separated from the powers that be, from the mantras of our world that say we can build a life on our own. Sometimes we need to be in the wilderness. This is something that we see in the scriptures a lot. God speaks to people in the wilderness. God protects people in the wilderness. God reveals himself in the wilderness. Sometimes we need a little break, and we need to get out of the concrete jungle and out of the system long enough so we can examine ourselves. Have I adopted the system's mantra? The second thing we are challenged to do is, while we're separate in the world, the second thing is to follow Jesus in the world. And that's the trick, isn't it? How do I separate myself from the world while still following Jesus in the world? Because remember what God told the people of Israel when they were in exile? In Jeremiah 29, he said, no, I don't want you to remove yourself from Babylon, but seek the prosperity of the city, right? Build your gardens, have families, build homes, be in the city, but follow me while you're in the city. And that's the trick. Follow Jesus while we're living in the city. Meaning that while we're in the city, don't be astonished and allured by the promise of wealth and prosperity, all without God. Don't be sucked into it, but be astonished by Jesus. Be astonished as a worshiper. Haven't we seen throughout Revelation all these little episodes and breaks where people just suddenly break out into worship? Worthy is the Lamb, they start singing, right? Throughout Revelation, which is to tell us, cultivate worship, follow Jesus. Make sure that the beauty and the wonder that catches your imagination is not from the world, not from consumerism or the American dream. It is Jesus and the kingdom. Be more astonished by the kingdom than anything else that this world has to offer. So following Jesus means be a person of worship. And then following Jesus means stay faithful in the messiness of our world. Because like I said, once people start to see that secularism has its gaps and its holes, they're going to see you loving your neighbor, showing hospitality, reaching out to the poor, trying to identify and advocate for the marginalized. They're going to see you and they're going to look at you and say, whoa, you don't seem to be following the system. What reason can you give me for the hope that you have? And hopefully they find us faithfully following Jesus. Not having to do big things, just faithfully following Jesus in the world, in the reality of the brokenness that's in and around us. So that's the call. The call, the charge, be separate. Examine yourself. Where have you adopted some of the world's way in your own life of how you relate with people? See yourself, the way you entertain yourself, any of those things. How have you just adopted all that that's led to compromise? But secondly, how can you cultivate worship so that you are following Jesus as the one who is your wonder, your treasure, in the midst of a world that's promising treasure in all the other wrong things? That's the trick. That's the challenge that Revelation's giving to us. Do you accept that challenge? the challenge to be separate, the challenge to faithfully follow in the world. Do you accept that challenge? That's the big question, and only you can answer that. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, we do pray that while we stay faithful to you, that we seek justice, that we walk humbly with you, that we care for the poor, that we educate children, that we value life, that we uphold the sanctity of life, that we care for the lost. Lord, that as we do that, Lord, that our lives would bear witness to the reality that you are the Lord of Lords, that you are the King worth following. So, Lord Jesus, keep us faithful. And Lord, search our hearts. See if there's any way that we've compromised and adopted the way of the world in our thinking and our relating and our language and anything, Lord. Help us to discern and stay separate but still belonging to you and being faithful to what you've called us to do in this world. Give us grace. Give us wisdom for this. And help us, Lord, to encourage one another in this. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.